Okay, so chapter 9, this is chapter 9 in your textbook, your prescribed book. It's about surveys and questionnaires, and also we call this the measuring instrument. So what do you need to collect your data? That is your survey and your questionnaire. Now, if you go back to your learner guide, you will see part of assignment 2 is also to design a measuring instrument or a questionnaire. So assignment 2 consists of two things. It consists of a proposal and it consists of a measuring instrument or a questionnaire. Why do you have to design the questionnaire now? Because already in your proposal you need to tell me what your questionnaire will look like, or your survey, or the questions that you will ask in your interviews. You already need to explain that to me in your proposal. So those two things go together. All right. So make sure that you check your learner guide. We will go through the rubric later so that we can make sure we've covered everything for the assignment. So today we are going to look at firstly questionnaire design. How do I ask my questions? What type of questions can I ask? What scales can I use? Those type of things. And then secondly, we're going to look at the sampling. That is the chapter that we were supposed to do tomorrow. Sampling, how do I sample? Who am I going to give the questionnaire to? So let's look at the outcomes. You need to be able to understand what is a survey and how to design a survey. You need to discuss and exemplify different data collection methods, different methods by which you can obtain the data from respondents. You need to be able to describe advantages and disadvantages of these methods that we will look at today. And also you need to understand the different kinds of questions that you can ask in your survey or in your questionnaire. So what is a survey? A survey is the way or the means by which we collect information about attitudes, values, perceptions, satisfaction, whatever the case might be. This is also linked then to your research question. Your research question should be answered by a survey. Okay. It's the assessment of the current status. You can assess current status of a specific topic, the opinions of your respondents, the beliefs of your respondents, and the attitudes. And you can use questionnaires to do that, or you can use interviews. So a survey can either be a questionnaire on which you pose the questions, or you pose the questions by means of an interview. So a survey describes and interprets the responses, the what, of your study, of your topic or your title. The characteristics of a survey: samples are usually big. Especially if we use a questionnaire, then we will have a big sample. Variables are measured. Those variables that you find in your research question that we talked about yesterday, the dependent and independent variables, they are measured by means of the survey or a questionnaire or in an interview. So you need to understand what are the variables that I'm looking at and how are they measured, so that you can ask those variables either in the form of a question or in the form of a statement in your survey. And multiple hypotheses can be tested. Statements that you want to prove, or statements that you either want to prove or disprove of, the hypothesis, you can do that by means of a survey. Very importantly, when you are busy with your survey, you need to take into account the survey design, and there are specific aspects that you need to look at. For example, sampling issues. What is your sampling strategy? We're going to look at the sampling method. How are you going to get your respondents? How many respondents do you need? What is the characteristics that your respondents would need? What is the minimum response rate that is acceptable for your study? So how many do you need in order for your study to be effective or to be representative of the larger population? So that you first need to understand before you can do your survey, because you need to understand the characteristics of your population, of your respondents, so that you can design your questionnaire specifically for them. You need to understand certain design issues. Design issues meaning how must this questionnaire look? What must the layout be? What must the font sizes be? How are you going to structure this questionnaire in a way that it's easy for the respondents to read through the questionnaire and to understand and to make their answers on that questionnaire? So design issues specifically pertaining to the layout, the structure, and those things of the questionnaire. Then if you are doing interviews, there are interviewer issues that you also need to deal with, because interviewers will also need questions that they are going to ask to the respondents. So the interviewer needs to take note. How are they going to train the people who's going to conduct the interviews? The gender, the cultural background of interviewers. Why is that important? Because the interviewer's opinion can sometimes be biased and they can influence the person with whom they are interviewing. So one must take care that you have interviewers that are objective when interviewing the respondents. So interviewer issues is important. If you are the main interviewer and you have other interviewers in your survey or is going to conduct interviews, you need to brief them on the project. You need to tell them how questions should be posed. You need to warn them about bias, interviewer bias. Okay. So issues in terms of interviewers needs to be looked at. And then how the data collection method, when you're deciding on your survey, what method are you going to use in order to get the information? There's different methods. Are you doing telephonic interviews? Are you doing a postal survey or a postal questionnaire? Are you going to self-administer the questionnaire at an event or at an establishment or whatever? So there's different methods, and you need to decide on that, because that will determine how your questionnaire will look. All right. So now let's move then to the data collection methods. Now these are all the methods that you can possibly use to gather the information from your respondents. You can do a group administration of questionnaires where there's a group of people who administer the questionnaires to the respondents. So you can make use, in other words, of field workers. We can say a group of field workers can go to an event and say 5 people, and all of them, they distribute questionnaires at that specific event. There are various advantages to this method. Many respondents can complete in a short time. Why? Because you have a group who's responsible for administering the questionnaires. The administrators can check for accuracy. If you are with the respondent and the respondent completes the questionnaire and misses one question, the group administrator or the field worker can tell the respondent, you've missed this question, just make sure that you complete this one as well. So you can check for accuracy as well. It's relatively cheap and easy to do. Always that is an issue. We want to save time and money in all cases, so this is an option if you have limited budget and limited time. Respondents can be reached across long distances if you do a group administration. Various field workers can maybe phone or so, or email the questionnaire to the respondents. Response rate is optional. In other words, the rate or the percentage that you require for the sample to be representative is optional. And the interviewer can assist with any issues. If the respondent is not sure of a specific question, what it means or what it asks, then the interviewer can explain and clarify that question. So the interviewer can assist with any issues when it comes to this type of method. The disadvantages, it can lead to different responses when different administrators administer the test, because maybe also bias can influence the respondents, because there are administrators involved in the process. They might influence the responses, and that means that different responses will be gathered from the respondents. The primary researcher has little control over what happens in the field. So if the administrators are in the field administrating the questionnaire, the primary researcher cannot go with each one of them to make sure they administer correctly and explain the project's objective correctly. So that means that he or she has limited control over what the administrators tell the respondents and how they explain the project to the respondents. The primary researcher can also not control the conditions in which the questionnaire is administered. That goes hand in hand with the previous one. costs could be high when we are using standardized tests. So there is a cost implication, but only when we use then the standardized test, which we get from a questionnaire. A standardized test is a questionnaire that has already been proved to be reliable and valid and has been used to measure the same thing in different contexts. But costs could be high if you have to buy the rights to that questionnaire in order to use that. Then we can also use postal or email surveys, where you administer your questionnaire or your survey via postal services or via electronic services or email. Advantages of this is also cheap and easy to do. Respondents can complete at a convenient time, so when it suits the respondent, if I don't have time now to complete the questionnaire that's in my inbox, I can do it later when I have time. So it can be convenient. Respondents are not pressured to do it now, but that can also be a problem. I'll explain now. Respondents can check personal records. They can check what they've already completed and what they've answered at the different questions, and no interviewer who's present, there's no interviewer who can interfere with the process. So there's no bias. It's an objective process because the interviewer is not present to interfere or influence the answers that respondents make. So some of the disadvantages: low response rate. Very often if we use things like postal and email, because the respondents are not pressured to complete that questionnaire now, they will forget or they will think it's not important and they won't do it. Then your response rate is low. So it's oftentimes a struggle to get your questionnaires back if you run it through an email survey or a postal survey. And nowadays they also run surveys on Facebook, I see, and social media. That can work, but then you'll have to let your survey run for quite a long time until you have this, a response rate that is acceptable to you.
So would that take longer than your email surveys?
Yeah, I think it would, because there's no other category of surveys for this thing, for social media. There's no specific, I think when the book maybe was written, I don't know, but I think it will fall under this. So condition of completion cannot be controlled. Also, you don't know where the respondent is when he or she is completing this questionnaire. Maybe the respondent is sitting next to his or her best friend or next to his or her mum, and the best friend or the mum can make comments from the side, influencing the respondent. So it's not an accurate description necessarily of what the specific respondent is thinking of answering, because it can be influenced by other people. You don't have control over that in this instance. There's no one that can assist with the problems. If the respondent does not understand the question, there's no one that can explain the question to him, because it's sent via electronic media or postal media. So there's no interviewer or administrator that can clarify questions. There is also the respondents can give the questionnaire to someone else to complete, just to get it done. They can ask someone else to do it. Then again, that will influence your data, because you don't want someone else, you want that specific person for a reason, because that person has certain characteristics that is part of your study. So it's no use if it's given to someone else. It will influence your data and your percentages and things like that. And respondents, if you do it like this, they must be able to read and understand. They must be literate if you have respondents if you do it like this, because they're going to get something in their inbox that they need to read, or something via their postal box that they need to read and be able to understand and actually answer and write on the questionnaire. So you need literate people to take part in your research then. Telephone surveys can be also conducted, or a type of a telephone interview. In this case, the researcher will also need to design a type of a questionnaire which can be administered over a telephone. The advantages of this: surveys can be done quickly, although I think it can also be time consuming. I don't think it's always that quickly and easy. I hate the telephone. I don't want to phone people and ask them questions over the telephone, and it irritates me as well if people phone me and ask me questions. I will tell them, no, I can't do it now, I'm on my way somewhere. So this, one must really look at the advantages depending on the type of your study, if this will be feasible. So I don't know if I really agree that it can be done that quickly. I think it can be a very frustrating job for the researcher to phone 50 people on a list and get them to respond to your questions and getting their attention and time. So, but you can debate about that. Respondents can be reached across a long distance. You can phone anywhere, any country, any province, any place you can phone if there's reception, obviously. High response rate, why? High response rate, it's possible that there's a high response rate because you are talking to the person and actually forcing them to complete or to answer your questions. But as I say, oftentimes I will just tell them I can't answer your questions now, phone me back. And then when they phone back, I won't answer. So, depending. Interviewer can assist with issues. So again, there's the issue of the issues again. The interviewer can clarify any questions or any things that's not clear to the respondent. And in this case, you don't have respondents that should be able to read and write because it's over the telephone. They must hear properly, though, what you're asking them, and they must still understand what you're asking them. Disadvantages of this method, it can be high costs, especially in South Africa. I think it's very expensive to phone around and get this type of, and your conversations might be long, and that can become very expensive then. And your questionnaire cannot be too long because of the costs. Okay, so you need to determine what do you really need to ask over the phone in order to answer your question, because you cannot take up a lot of time. Only people with phones, telephones or cell phones can be reached. So you can't reach any respondent that has no access to a phone. And there is the risk of bias, interviewer bias, because the interviewer is talking to the respondents and they can influence the respondent's response in this case. Face-to-face surveys. So this is an interview type of survey. You can sit in front of your respondent and you have a questionnaire and you ask the questions from the questionnaire to the respondents then. The major advantage of this is that you have a high response rate because you are in front of your respondent. They have to answer your questions. They have agreed to take part in your study. They need to answer the question. So you have a high response rate. You can use longer questionnaires in this case. The interviewer can again assist with issues. We've talked about that. Respondents in this case also don't have to be literate because there's an interviewer translating the questions or explaining some of the questions. But again, we have the thing of bias then. If they can influence, if they can explain, they can influence the questions as well. This can be high in costs, and it's very time consuming to do face-to-face interviews or face-to-face surveys with respondents. Because it takes a lot of time to do that, and time is money, they always say, right? Time and cost investment to train interviewers. If you have different interviewers interviewing the respondents, you need to also maybe provide them with some kind of incentive, and you need to train them again on how to administer the questionnaire, and then again the risk of bias. Okay, so those are the 4 types of data collection methods, or the surveys, the types of surveys that you can then use to answer the question. Remember, your survey must always go back and look, am I going to answer the question? Am I going to meet my objective with these questions that I'm asking? So always keep that in mind. And these are methods you must decide. Look at the advantages and the disadvantages as a researcher. You need to decide what method you think is best. I am not sure in the other fields, but in tourism, where I come from, the best method that we use is the survey method, where you self-administer your questionnaire to the respondents, because then you get the highest response rate. I have done email surveys. The response rates are low. It's frustrating because you have to wait forever to get your response rate. Self-administer, it forces people to complete your questionnaire because you're pressuring them. You're standing in front of them. They have to.
But in social media, you can't put a time frame on yours. Because usually you can tell people that it's going to expire in, let's say, 72 hours.
But people can still ignore it. They can choose to ignore that. But yes, it's wise to do that. But they can still decide I am or I'm not going to, or they can forget. But social media, I've seen people with a lot of success on social media. Myself, I haven't done that, but I know of people who've had a lot of success on social media, and but they just let the survey run a bit longer so that they can get the response rate that is acceptable. And also, I've seen people doing Skype interviews as well. That is also an option. If you have respondents that are located far away, you can also do a type of Skype interview. Okay, but you must decide, talk to your mentor, what is the method that you're going to use. Now let's specifically look then at the questionnaire design. How must your questionnaire look like when you give it out or administer it to the respondents? The first thing that you need to keep in mind is that you need to instruct your respondents. What do they need to do? Don't just give them a table saying male, female. What must they do? Indicate your gender on the table below by circling the appropriate option. You give them an instruction. If you give them a Likert scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree, what must they do on that scale? Must they evaluate something? Must they rate something? Must they indicate importance? What must they do? You have to indicate the instruction. What must they do? Must they make a cross? Must they circle? Must they make a check mark? Instruct your respondents, okay, on what they have to do. They need to understand what is expected of them in terms of your questionnaire. Your instructions must be simple, clear and concise. It must be easy to understand. If I read the question and the instruction, I must exactly know this is what this means. This is what I must do as a respondent. There are examples in the textbook. I see I've indicated there one on page 178. I don't know if you have your books with you, but under instructions there is an example of a good instruction. It says, answer each question by circling the appropriate number in the shaded box or by writing your opinion in the space provided. So this clearly says what you must do. So you have to be concise and clear on the instruction for your respondents. The appearance of your questionnaire is very important. The questionnaire is something that goes out to the respondents. It must be user-friendly, it must be neat, and it must be printed. You can't give your respondents a written questionnaire to answer. They can't read your handwriting and it's unprofessional. So it's a printed document or a printed questionnaire. It must be legible and not too small font. So it must be easy to go through the questionnaire and to read the questionnaire. It must be structured properly in a logical order so that the respondents understand it. Give clear instructions, print it on a good quality paper. If you're going to administer it or if you're going to post it, you have to print it on a good quality paper. And it should be concise. Brevity meaning it's concise or exact, as we've already said. So the appearance, basically what it means, the appearance must be professional, it must be neat, it must be concise, it must be easy to read. Okay. Think of also the time. How long are you going to make your questionnaire? The completion time of the questionnaire. For children and teenagers, if they are part of your study, you must give them a questionnaire that is no longer than 20 minutes, for example. These are just guidelines. 20 minutes, although it's already long for me. 30 minutes for adults. It's very long, eh? Not more than 100 to 120 items. That is also, if I get that questionnaire, I'm immediately negative. This lengthy thing that I have to complete, I don't have time. Okay. Especially if we look at, if you're going to respondents in business people won't have time for that lengthy type of questionnaire. People who are on holiday, which are going to send the questionnaires to, give the questionnaires to, they won't complete a questionnaire for you with 120 items on it. Okay. So think of the length of your questionnaire as well. It must be practical for your respondents. What amount of time do they have to complete your questionnaire? All right. So that guidelines, it's too long for me. Then you need to think of the sequence, the order in which you're going to ask the questions. It should be in such a way not to confuse the respondents. You need to look at question wording, meaning the meaning of each question must be the same for all respondents. So in other words, you must be clear with what you're asking. All respondents must understand the same thing with the question that you are asking. It should be in an understandable language, and with that, it means don't use jargon, special jargon or special terminology that's part of your field that you understand because you are studying PR or hospitality or tourism. You understand that jargon, but your respondent does not necessarily understand that. So make it easy for them to understand. My respondents in tourism, they won't necessarily understand what is the economic impact. Maybe they won't understand that. I need to make it easy for them to understand it, okay? Because they are not in the field. We are the experts. They are not necessarily in that field. They do not understand the jargon. So that is what's meant. It should be understandable. And some of you might have respondents that come from communities where they do not understand proper English, for example. Then you have to translate that questionnaire for them. You'll need to have a questionnaire that they can understand and read. And that might mean that you need to get a translator that will translate your questionnaire into their language so that they can better understand it. That will improve the quality of your data. Okay, so keep that also in mind. Avoid ambiguity, lack of precision or vagueness. Don't be vague in your questionnaire. Ask exactly what you mean and what you want to ask so that they can understand. I want to check just the book because there's also very good examples in the book about these type of mistakes. Avoid double questions, or we also call that double-barreled questions. For example, I want to give you this example. You can't ask someone, do you work too slow or too fast? That's double-barreled, okay? Too slow, too fast. Where are you now? What are you asking me? I don't understand what you're asking me. I can't answer that question. So your data will be skewed if you ask something like that. That is a double-barreled question. There's two things in that question, or there's more than one thing that you're asking me. Is it too slow or is it too fast? Okay, so don't ask more than one thing in a question. Otherwise, your respondent will be totally confused. They don't know which one are you asking. Are you asking about the too slow or about the too fast? All right. Then avoid leading questions. We don't want to influence our respondents, okay, because we want an accurate response, a true reflection of what they mean. A leading question is if you ask, for example, do you agree that research is an interesting subject? I am leading you on. I'm saying you have to agree. I'm actually pushing you to agree, okay. I must rather be objective in my question, okay. So don't lead people on by asking, do you disagree? Do you agree? Okay. That is leading. Avoid asking knowledge questions. Don't ask your respondents questions such as, when did the first man land on the moon? That is a knowledge question. And how is that going to help your research? Do you want to test if they know this? It doesn't make sense to ask a knowledge question. You're not testing their knowledge. You want their opinion, you want their belief, you want their perception, you want to know if they're satisfied or not satisfied. You are not testing knowledge. Okay. Avoid asking hypothetical questions. How would you feel if secondary schools and universities were to merge? How would you feel if secondary schools and universities were to merge? How would you feel? Everybody would agree that won't be a good thing. It's a hypothetical question. The answer is kind of obvious. Don't ask it if the answer is obvious. That is a bad idea and we know that. Okay? So don't ask a question like that. That is a hypothetical question where you ask an obvious question which you actually know what the answer is going to be. You can predict the answer already. Okay. You want to gain new information. You don't want an answer that you already know. You want new information. That is research, right? Let me now just see where we are. Avoid double negative questions. For example, don't you agree that smoking is not good for you? Don't you agree that smoking is not good for you? So you're asking, don't you agree it's not good for you? So what are you actually asking? It's confusing, right? So that is double negative because you're asking, don't you agree that it's not good for you? You're actually asking, is it good for you? So that won't work. Avoid statements with a not in, because that might also be confusing, especially when you use a Likert scale where you have, agree, totally agree to disagree. If you ask that type of question with a not in, like the previous question, the respondent won't know where to tick on the Likert scale because you've made it negative. So try to avoid using that negative. The not, don't use it. Then we recommend that items where is those ones? Avoid making it still comes. Items must be formulated in the first person. It's preferred, it's recommended. You don't have to, but it makes it easier then for the respondent to associate. If you make the statement that I feel positive, I is the first person, we, it's the first person. Okay, so you can use statements like that in your questionnaire. I feel positive about research methodology. Okay, then I as a respondent, I can associate with that because I'm thinking about myself and the subject. All right, so you can use I and we, but we never use I and we when we write scientifically in our proposals or in our literature. Then you don't use I and we. Okay. That is the first bit. Items should be formulated as statements and not as questions. You can rather make statements, especially if you use your scales. You will make a statement like I've said, I feel positive about whatever, and they must indicate how positive they feel. Or the following is important to me in the first person, and they must indicate what is important. It's a statement that you are giving them. Questions, we're going to get to the different type of questions. It is sometimes necessary to ask questions, but it's difficult then to measure the responses on an open question or so. But it is sometimes also necessary to ask a question and not a statement. Avoid making erroneous assumptions. For example, assuming that your respondent only has one car when in fact the respondent has 5 cars or whatever, or assuming that your respondents have children. Because what happens then you ask them, say for example your respondent does not have children, but you ask them, how many children do you have? Or you ask them, please indicate the ages of your children, or something about the children, but they don't have children. That is an erroneous assumption. Okay. So you will ask them, do you have children? They must say yes or no. The next question will be, based on the previous question, which ages are your children? Okay, so you need to link it like that. You first need to determine, do they have it? And if they have it, then they must go to the next question. Okay. And then avoid asking sensitive questions that might offend your respondents. For example, in this textbooks, they ask, how often do you have sex per week? That is a very straightforward question. And it's a sensitive type of question. Someone does not want to necessarily answer that. Sometimes in medical tests, you need to answer those type of questions. But be very careful when it comes to things like income, when it comes to things like languages and races. Those type of things can cause troubles for you. Yes, you might want to determine which languages your respondents speak, But people are sensitive if you ask them about their race, if you ask them about their income, they become sensitive. So see if you can avoid it. But sometimes it is necessary, and I have asked it. What do you earn? And they need to indicate. But it's anonymous. If it's anonymous, it's okay if you can ask that. But be sensitive about things like race, income, and those type of things. And then avoid questions that are biased. For example, respondents living near the sea could be expected to know the times of high and low tide. The same would not be true for respondents living in the Kalahari. So you need to take into account who are your respondents, and you should not lead them on to answer a specific way that you want the answer to be based on their culture or where they come from or so. So you need not to be biased. Oh, I've already done that. Then let's just look at the different types of questions that we can ask in our questionnaires. There is the open-ended question. There's also examples there, I see. You can go through the examples. So the open-ended question is where you don't indicate the categories for the respondent. The question is left open for the respondent to indicate his or her own answer. So this gives us an honest and a detailed answer. Respondent's thinking process is revealed. Complex questions can be adequately answered. And then you have to identify themes from this. So an open-ended question, that is more of a qualitative type of question because you leave it up to the respondent. You can ask the respondent, explain your perception about VUT as a tertiary institution. And then you leave it open. And you give them half a page or whatever, and they can write whatever they want in that page. So that is an open-ended question. This way you can get quite depth information, and you understand what is the thinking behind the respondent. But there are also the disadvantages to this, but it does have a place in research to ask also the open-ended. Disadvantages, the detail may differ from respondents, so it might be difficult for you to analyze the data that you get in an open question and to attach numerical values to that. You will get, if you have 50 respondents, you might get 50 different answers to that question. And that makes it very difficult then to analyze that question and the respondents and to identify a theme if you have 15 different responses. So it can be difficult in that way. Coding, it's difficult then to code or to identify the themes from the specific question. Respondents may need time. This type of questions take longer to answer because now they have to write a paragraph. With a closed-ended question, they just make a circle or a tick or whatever. But with this question, they need to write and think. It's difficult for people who cannot read or write properly. They cannot answer such a question properly if they cannot read or write properly. And you can analyze it statistically, but it becomes difficult because of the various responses that you get. So it's difficult to analyze and capture the information. It also takes time to capture this type of information. But it does have a place, especially then in our qualitative research, we can use open-ended. Closed-ended questions. There we have multiple choice questions, for example. You can look on page 181. There's various examples of a multiple choice question, but the crux of a closed-ended question is that you indicate as a researcher, you give the answers. So they must indicate on the answers what you give. So you ask them male or female. What is your gender? Indicate your gender, male or female. They need to tick one of those. Occupation, you list some occupations. They tick one of those. Province of residence, you list the provinces. They tick one of those. That is closed-ended questions. So you get multiple choice questions. You get filter questions. A filter question is like I've just said. If you want to ask someone with children something, you first need to ask them, do they have children? And so you filter them. If they have children, they can continue to the next question. Maybe your questionnaire is only for people between the ages of 18 and 30. You first need to determine what is the age of the respondent that you are approaching. If they answer yes, that they are between that age, they can go on to the next question. If not, they cannot go on. So that is filtering your questionnaire. So you also very carefully need to think in your questionnaire. You can't ask a respondent about a product if they have not used that product, for example, before. If they have not visited that establishment, but you're asking about a previous visit, but they haven't visited, then you can't ask that question to the respondent. You first need to determine, has the respondent visited or used the product before you can let the respondent continue. Follow-up questions can be used. The follow-up is then, if they said yes, they go on. That is the follow-up. All right. You can use ranking questions. That is where the example also that I gave to you yesterday, where you need to indicate which subject do you enjoy most, for example. You indicate, number 1, I like research methodology the most of all subjects. After that, I like tourism development. After that, I like advanced strategic, you indicate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on a list of items that was given to you. So you indicate your preferred choice in a specific order. That is a ranking question where you rank your questions. Then category questions. That can be respondents choose only one set of categories. Biographical questions represent one example of category questions. So typically a questionnaire might start Section A, demographical characteristics of respondents. And in that section, you only deal with biographics or demographics. Age, gender, province of residence, income, occupation, those are demographical kind of questions. So that is a category that you can deal with, okay? Categorical questions. So I know in the tourism, most of you will start with your either a biographical or a demographical section, a category. Quantity questions, respondents provide a number which gives the number of some characteristics. For example, what was your mark for maths at the end of grade 11? So this, you need to indicate a quantity, a number in terms of that, okay? So quantity questions has to do with indicating the number. You get grid questions where you have a table and respondents can indicate on the table what the responses are. And then in a fill-in format, you can also have like a name, then you leave it open, the person will write their name, province of residence, they will write their province, but then that is a fill-in question because you don't give the option already. They need to fill their name in and their surname in and their occupation in or whatever. The advantages of a closed-ended question, it's easy to answer for the respondent, so it does not take up a lot of time for the respondents. You can list a lot of things in a closed-ended question, and it goes relatively quick, but you can measure quite a lot of things then. Coding is easier and analysis is easier because you have a set number of categories that they must tick, and you just capture that information easily. You don't have to read extensively to code and to analyze. And sensitive questions can be answered more easily in this way. Disadvantages: given the response may suggest an answer that the respondents would not have thought of. The answer the respondent wants to give may not be one of the options. I've also used the example yesterday. We cannot list all the occupations, for example, in a country, but you can list the most common ones, and then you leave one space open, other, and they must specify. Then it becomes fill in at the bottom. They must indicate other, I am a teacher, because it was not listed, for example, or whatever. So it's sometimes difficult to give all the categories, but there's solutions to that. It's easy to answer misunderstood questions. Answers are simple with no detail because you either agree or you do not agree, or you are either male or you're either female. There's nothing else to that. Respondents can answer even if they have no opinion or knowledge. They can still make a respond to the question. Even if they are not too sure, they must make a ticker option. Oh, I don't know if we're going to do... Okay, so as I've said, we have category questions, which are also then closed-ended questions, and this is where our biographical information or demographics will come in. This is mostly we want to determine the profile of the sample. So in tourism, we will have a section A. We want to know about festival visitors, and we will ask about their age, their occupation, their gender, their language, and so on. And that will all be to get a profile. And then you can use those variables to also correlate with some of the other things that you're asking. So if you want to see if there's a relationship between gender and whether or not people will revisit the specific festival, one can correlate that because you've asked that in a biographical section as well. So biographical information is used to profile your sample so that you can see how many males did we have, what age, how many males, how many females, what ages are they in, what incomes do they get, and so on. Like it says their age, gender, marital status, home language. So you can also include that in your questionnaire. It's always good to include a biographical section because it gives the profile. You can also ask things like mobile communication modes, type of social networking that they use. It can come into this section, which newspapers they read, and so on, which radio stations they listen to. You can ask that to give you a profile of your respondents. Okay, I don't want to go through Likert scale again because we've done that yesterday as well. Just briefly, the Likert scale is the scale on which the respondent can choose on a 5-point or on a 7-point Likert scale. If I ask you, I give you the statement, I feel positive about VUT. You have to agree on a Likert scale. I either strongly agree, I agree, or I neither agree or disagree. I disagree or I strongly disagree. That is a 5-point Likert scale. And you need to rate your feeling on that scale. How positive are you towards VUT? Okay. So that is Likert scale. It can also be on a 7-point. And we also talked yesterday about the semantic differential scale, where we used the example 10 numbers, 1 to 10. Numbers 1 to 5 means that Emerald Resort and Casino is clean. Number 6 to 10 means that it is dirty, more to the dirty side. So that is the semantic differential scale. So it measures how respondents feel about a certain aspect. Okay, so that is questionnaire design. Any questions about that? So what you need to take into account when you design your questionnaire, firstly look at your research question for me so that you can identify the variables that you need to measure. You need to look at the design of your questionnaire. How is it going to look? It must be professional. You need to look at the wording of your questionnaire, the instructions, avoiding those mistakes, the double-barreled those things. And then you also need to think of your sampling. Who's going to complete your questionnaire? Who's your respondents? What type of questions are you going to include? Open-ended, closed-ended, multiple choice questions, Likert scale, semantic differential scale. So think about the biographical information that you need to include. So those are the things that you need to think in terms of the questionnaire. This is also something that you need to discuss with your mentor. All right. Even now, start thinking and making those appointments so that you can get on track with that. Do you want to take a 5-minute break? Yes.